Hi folks, hope you're all doing well. The first Mastering in the Box live stream, so welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you just drop me a little note in the comments just to let me know if you can hear me? Just a few challenges today with some of the audio signals, so if you're watching, can you just drop me a little note in the chat box just to let me know that you can hear the dialogue? That'd be great, thank you. Fantastic, that's brilliant. Thank you, Kieran. I'm just going to quickly also play back some of the music as well. I just want to test the audio here. So if I just quickly switch over here, and let's just quickly test the audio, make sure this all works fine. So could you hear the audio there as well? Fantastic, fantastic, brilliant. Thank you, Kieran. Well, welcome to Mastering in the Box. This is my first live stream, and yeah, so following some feedback from yourselves, a lot of mastering is there's a lot of technical functions involved around mastering, but actually a lot of it also is subjective actions as well, and it's the way you listen, the way you perceive things. It's a lot of interpretation, and some of those kind of more interpretive kind of ideas are things that are not very easy to teach, especially in a 15 to 20 minute video. But it's something that a live stream is going to be a much more beneficial avenue to actually teach some more of those kind of those less technical aspects of mastering. So what I want to do is go through kind of like a mock mastering session, and we'll go through bits stage by stage. So as I say, it's my first live stream. Just a few things I just wanted to go through first and foremost. It's probably going to take around about an hour and a half. I'm pretty flexible on time here, so we just go through, and please feel free to ask any questions you have as we go through. So that's not an issue at all. Just one thing I would say to you is just make sure you listen on monitors or headphones or something like that, because it is going to be quite difficult to hear. Some of these moves that we're going to make are going to be quite subtle, so I'd always recommend listening on monitors or headphones. So that's just some of the ground rules there. In terms of my monitoring system here, you can see I'm actually using the headphones, which are the Audio S4X, and these are fantastic headphones. I'd recommend them to anyone. At some point I'll leave some links in the description as well, so if anyone wants to get some high-end professional sounding headphones, then I'd highly recommend these. I've had these about a month and they have been fantastic so far. The telltale sign for me is the fact that I've been using my monitors here for quite a few years now, and the headphones, I've had no issue at all transitioning, so it's been really, really good. So highly recommend those. So that's basically it. So feel free to ask some questions. We'll go through over into the door in a second, and we'll start the mastering session. Just another thing to note here, we've got a bit of a lag between the what I'm doing this end and between them playing on YouTube. So Okay, so let's head on over to the door. So, the song that I've chosen for this week was a song called "Get Down" by Nick Graveswell, and this was a song that I mastered probably around 2.5 years ago. Nick is a fantastic singer-songwriter from the UK. He's very much along the kind of hard rock, kind of bluesy kind of edge, that kind of inspiration. And the particular song we're going to feature today is a song called "Get Down," and yeah, it's a really good track. It's quite upbeat, quite lively tempo. It's not too heavy, but it's got yeah, it's got some real kind of body and some real weight to it. So it's going to be quite a good example to listen to. In terms of what I'm going to do today, I'm using Reaper for this particular session, following some feedback, and I've got a lot of followers from the Reaper groups and the Reaper forums. So I'm in Reaper today, and I'm going to try and use as many stock plugins as possible. The exception will be with the limiter. I love the TR5 stealth limiter, the T-Rex by OK Multimedia. It's just one of my favourite limiters, so I'll be using that on the master bus. And outside of that, we're going to try and use as many stock plugins as we can. In terms of, a lot of people do ask me for recommendations, especially when you're first starting out. I want to keep this quite basic, quite high level. You know, really kind of get to know your stock plugins. A lot of DAWs have some great stock plugins, and Reaper is no exception there. They have some fantastic plugins. So really get to know your stock plugins, because they will, you know, once you start getting to understand how they work, you can then kind of expand and kind of move on from there. So let's just play a bit of the song now. It's it's the song "Get Down" by Nick Graveswell. I'm going to play a snippet for you so you can get an idea of what we're going to be doing now. So it's great sounding rock track. So not too heavy. It's got real good beats and real good life to it. I've just been making a few notes as we go through. As I said, I did master this song around about 2.5 years ago. But I've really, one of the reasons I chose this because I wanted to kind of come at it with a real fresh approach. And one of the things that we did back when we originally mastered it was very much kind of guided by the artist, as is the way. But with this, I wanted to kind of approach it with maybe a little bit more free reign as well. So just a few of the things. It's whenever I'm starting out, I always want to go through and kind of set a clear plan of what I want to kind of achieve. And just kind of listening to the track itself, it's very mid-range focused. And the vocals are quite nice and crispy, but it'd be nice to kind of bring out some of that air at the top of the frequencies there. But I do feel that the song just lacking the kind of that bit of that bass punch. So the kick itself is relatively well defined, but it just needs more weight to it. It needs to be more rounded. It feels quite almost kind of like lacking in certain areas. And I think as well, it's the bass kind of needs to be bringing out as well. Where it's so kind of mid-range focused, the guitars kind of take over. So it's kind of like, well, how can we kind of let the bass frequencies punch through? So that's going to be something we really need to kind of focus on. Say low end weight, give it some more punch. Nice and crispy on the highs, maybe just trying to really kind of bring out that vocal a bit more, and just kind of the balance, really trying to give it some more balance. I think one of my philosophies when it comes to mastering is really kind of is very much along achieving balance. And a lot of people say, well, it's very much dynamics, very much dynamics. Yes, dynamics are rather important, but I think it's really making sure we've got a good balance. And when people say to me, well, how do you start to think about it when you start listening to a song? What is it you're trying to listen for? What is it you're trying to identify? And for me, the real big eye-opener was when I started to think of everything, absolutely everything, in the context of volume. Because it's very easy to say, well, you just turn everything up. But if you think about a compressor is a dynamic compressor. We are effectively playing with volume. An EQ is volume. We are turning the volume down or up in certain frequencies. And that's really the key, is trying to get that overall, that stereophile balance when it comes to volume. So dynamics are very important, yes, trying to get that balance between the quieter and the louder parts, etc. But it's trying to get that overall volume balance across the entire song. And that stems right from the low frequencies all the way up to the highs, and making sure you've got a nice, clear and cohesive track at the end of it. So that's really it, trying to get that real focus on making sure that we've got some real good balance. And for me, it starts here with lacking the low end, when he's kind of bringing out the highs a little bit more. It's very kind of mid-range focused. As we go through, it'll be interesting to see if we start to kind of boost the lows. I'm wondering if we might start to get some more of those muddy frequencies, or those low mids as well. So generally, on kind of rock music, if it starts to get a bit muddy, I may do some form of EQ around, say, 200 to 400 hertz, but we can have a look at that in a minute as well. So let's get into this. I'm going to start by, say, heading over to the door, and let's take a listen to, or take a look at the loudness. I think this is a real good key for me, first and foremost, is whenever you're starting out, I would always recommend getting the track up to some form of ballpark loudness first and foremost. And there's a few reasons for this. Majority of the time when it comes to loudness, we will be using something like a limiter to boost the overall loudness of the track. Now, a limiter in its simplest form is a compressor. And if you limit too hard, you will start to compress. And if you don't do that up front, if you then go through and you start to master a track and you apply a mastering compressor, an EQ, and maybe a dynamic EQ, a multiband compressor, before you know it, you've applied 3 or 4 different compressors before you even got to the limiter, and then you're going to add another form of compression on top of that just to get the track up to some form of commercial competitive loudness. So I'd always recommend, especially when you're first starting out, just to try and get the track up to some form of ballpark loudness first and foremost. And another good reason for doing this is when it comes to doing a comparison, trying to really understand what the plugins you are using are doing, you really want to try and compare those changes on an equal level. And if you get the track up to a good loudness first and foremost, you don't really need to worry about that later on. You can do some real kind of simple comparisons as you go through the rest of the processing. So it's just a really good rule of thumb to try and get the track up to some form of commercial loudness. So let's start up with getting the loudness meter. I'm going to use let's use the EBU R128. So this is a JS plugin that's through Reaper. And as I say, on the master bus here, I've got the stealth limiter by IK Multimedia. So I'm just going to quickly go through here. I believe, I'll try and remember my shortcuts now. Okay, let's just do it the old-fashioned way. I did set a custom action up for this to set a region, but let's just do that. Let's do that. Let's just loop that area. So that's fine. So we've got it on a loop. So what we'll do now is play the song through again. The reason why I'm going to do this is because we need to understand where the loudness is at the moment. And one of the things I really want to kind of focus on is the correlation between the true peak level and the LUFS, because they are two different measures that we've got to understand. And quite frankly, we need to really kind of work out the correlation between the two, because the peak level, the true peak level, is getting your maximum volume or your maximum peak, and your LUFS measure is looking at the average or perceived loudness, and we need to really kind of get the balance between the two. So let's play the track all the way through once again with the EBU R128 loudest measurement here. This will give us our integrated LUFS, and look at the master fader here. This will give us the peak measure. So let's take another listen.
Some drinks and
Cool, cool, cool. Okay, so let's take a look. So this is quite interesting because first and foremost, let's just have a quick look at the true peak level. So there's a bit of a balance. I don't want to say issue, but it's just something we need to be kind of a little bit mindful of here. So on the left-hand channel, we've got 4.6 and 3.8 here. So we've got 3.8 is 3.8, 3.7 minus 3.7 is our true peak figure. So that's going to give us our couple of dBs worth of headroom. I just want to kind of just touch on headroom because it's quite an interesting subject where, once again, I think it's one of these myths that kind of goes around where it just kind of spreads like wildfire, and so many people say, oh, you must leave minus 6 dBs worth of headroom for it to go into mastering. I'm not necessarily sure that I particularly believe that to be true, and the reason I'm saying this is if you squash the hell out of your track, it's almost irrelevant whether you leave 6 dBs worth of headroom, because the whole point of leaving some headroom is to have a nice dynamic track where you can leave some headroom to allow for some compression through limiting or for some mastering compression. That's the whole kind of real point of leaving headroom. If you squash your mix, it's kind of irrelevant. You could leave 10 dBs worth of headroom, but by the time you get to the digital ceiling, you're just going to add pure compression. And that's one of the challenges when it comes to mixing and mastering, is it's trying to, yes, I would always recommend leaving a few dBs worth of headroom, but it's more important here to really make sure that you have enough dynamics in your track. And I appreciate this is going to be very much genre specific, and certain genres are going to have less dynamic range, but some will have more dynamic range. And certainly with something like this, with more like a classic rock, bluesy rock, hard rock type song, you'd probably have more dynamics than you would do in, say, an EDM hit or hip hop, something like that. But it's just that correlation between the headroom and the dynamics, really, and it's something really important to think about. So don't always get so het up on leaving 6 dBs worth of headroom, especially if you're going to start like we are going to start now by using a limiter. So if we are going to use the limiter first and foremost and get the volume in the ballpark loudness area, then you're kind of almost just eradicating your headroom anyway. So it's just something to it's really something to bear in mind. So don't get necessarily so het up on leaving 6 dBs worth of headroom. Think more about your dynamics. Think more about how are you going to get your track to that commercial loudness. If you're going to use a limiter, it is a compressor, to almost kind of allow a little bit more dynamic range, so you can kind of have something to play with when it comes to your final compression with your limiter. So that's your true peak figure. So when it comes to streaming, I'm going to treat this very much as if we was to do this for a streaming release, and the loudness guided levels, let's call them, because I don't like using the term target levels, because there is no one true target, because they all seem to differ. But one of the things that the streaming platforms will normally recommend is that you aim for at least minus 1 dBs worth of headroom. So when it comes to our limiter, we need to really make sure that we've got our ceiling here set with minus 1 dB. So that is going to be our output ceiling. So this is, say, the T-Rack stealth limiter, and this is our output ceiling, so I've set that to minus 1 dB. Okay, and that's just for the uploads for the streaming platforms. So as part of the upload process, it is likely to add some form of gain, so we need to allow 1 dB's worth of headroom, or a ceiling of 1 dB going into the streaming platforms, so we ensure we're not clipping, or it's not being clipped as part of the overall upload process for the streaming platforms. Okay, and then excuse me, when we're looking at the overall loudness, and this is where we need to kind of get that balance between the peak level and the perceived loudness. So the perceived loudness is measured in either LUFS or LKFS, depending on whether you follow the EBU R128 or the ITU standards. And the EBU is for Europe, and the ITU is for it's the American standard, but it's most commonly adopted now as LUFS. LUFS and LKFS are pretty much the same thing. So when it comes to your average or perceived loudness, this is where it kind of gets a little bit more complicated, because there's no real one figure, which is why I don't really believe in using a target. So for example, Apple Music will ask for a integrated LUFS measure of -16. Spotify's -14 if you're using it in normal mode. If you listen to it in loud mode, they will then push it to -11. And there's so many different kind of variations between the different streaming platforms. It's very, very difficult to kind of get a one true target. So which is one of the reasons why I don't really believe in having a target. And the other thing as well is each song, each song has its own needs. Some songs you'll be able to push higher than -14 LUFS. I wouldn't necessarily recommend pushing it too hard, because once again, if you start pushing it too hard, you'll see in a minute when you get that balance between the peak level and your integrated LUFS or your perceived loudness. You've got to find that balance between getting the perceived loudness right and getting the overall dynamics and the overall compression right. So that's something really we need to kind of take on board. So it's trying to get that balance. So the integrated LUFS measure the integrated LUFS measure is the one that they normally use for streaming platforms, and for this particular track it's -17.5, so we've certainly got some room to kind of push it up. Now it's something to bear in mind. There is also a few myths around how the streaming platforms handle loudness, and one of the common myths is if you go over -14 LUFS they're going to squash the track. They won't squash the track at all. The way that the streaming platforms use limiting, they will use a limiter to get the song louder. They don't use a limiter to get the song quieter. So when people say, well, if you push it over -14 LUFS, they're going to squash it, they won't squash it. The people that will squash it are the people who master it. So if you start pushing it to -6, -8, -9, if you're then applying lots of compression with your limiter, it's you that's squashing it, it's not the streaming platforms. The streaming platforms then use negative gain to bring it back down to -14 LUFS, and the reason they do that is purely for loudness normalization, so you have a much better listening experience. So it's something to bear in mind. It is a bit of a myth when people say, well, if you go over -14 they'll squash it. They don't. That's not true at all. Negative gain is applied for loudness normalization. Now if you don't hit -14, then predominantly or it always used to be the case that they would use a limiter. It's changed a bit now, because once again, this is another kind of the challenge that we face. And Spotify, for example, have just updated their loudness normalization in 2021, and it gets a bit more complicated, because if you listen to music in loud mode through Spotify, they will use a limiter to get your track to -11 LUFS. If you listen to it in normal mode, which uses -14 LUFS as the normalization figure, they will use a positive gain, not necessarily a limiter. But one of the things they won't do is they won't push it all the way up to -14 LUFS, potentially. So this is where we need to once again find the balance. So this is the example that they use on the Spotify website. If you have your mastered track if you master it to -20 LUFS integrated, but your true peak level is at -5. Now bear in mind you need to set the ceiling at -1, so you have 4 dBs worth of headroom between -5 and -1. So they will split that 4 dBs worth of difference, and they will push your LUFS figure up to -16 LUFS, not -14 LUFS. So I would always recommend people to err on the side of caution, and I always recommend to get to at least -14 LUFS, because if you don't, there's no guarantee that they will be able to push your track up to match the loudness of the other tracks when it comes to loudness normalization. So lots of different train of thoughts. Let me know what you think. There's so many different opinions on loudness and LUFS, etc. So let me know in the comments what you think about the ever-changing world of loudness normalization, because I'd be really keen to understand what you guys think. So let me just have a quick look at the comments here. Oh, brilliant. So we've got Tim there. Tim, thanks for joining us. And Dwight, thanks again for your questions there. That's very much appreciated. So yeah, it's certainly much food for thought, and yeah, it's ever changing, which is why I still at this moment I can't really recommend using a target figure because it changes all so often. So let's get back to the song. So we got the minus 17.5 LUFS there. We know we have to set the limiter to -1 for the ceiling, and for this I'm not going to do too much here. I'm probably going to put, let's just start with 3 dBs worth of input into the limiter. We know we've got to try and get this above, you know, -14 to really kind of, I feel comfortable that by pushing this that we're not going to start adding too much compression. Okay, so this is where we need to start factoring in the true peak and balance it with the luffs. So the example here, true peak of -3.7. If I set a ceiling to -1, then I have 2.7 dBs worth of headroom before the limiter starts engaging any compression. So if I then put the input on my limiter to 3 dBs, so that's going to add obviously 3 dBs, but technically it's only really going to compress 0.3 of a dB. So the compression at the peak, at its peak, is going to be minimal. So I think let's start with that. Let's start with 3 dBs worth of input, and then what that will then do is that will automatically boost the integrated luffs. Okay, so let's go with that, and I'll play some of the track all the way through. I should by rights play all the track through to get an accurate reading on the integrated, but what I'm also going to look at here is the momentary. Now, I don't want to kind of get too in depth with the luffs, but there's different ways of reading the luffs. So the luffs, the integrated level is the perceived loudness over the entirety of the track. The momentary and the short term are a much quicker, much shorter reading. So your momentary loudness is kind of a good indicator to kind of get your average perceived loudness at any one point in time. And a good rule of thumb here is I say try, it all depends on the song, but this is a little tip I actually got from Ian Shepherd. So check out Ian Shepherd. If you haven't heard of Ian Shepherd, seriously check out his YouTube channel. He's a fantastic teacher. He's got lots of advanced mastering courses available. But one of the things he always recommends is if you try and get your, say, your momentary loudness in the ballpark of, say, -10, then you'll find that your integrated is going to be, it probably won't be too far off. Now, once again, it's very much song dependent, very much genre dependent. It depends on the mix, but it's just a good rule of thumb to kind of get into and kind of use that as maybe that as the guide, and then kind of set everything else off the back of that. So let's take a listen through to the song now. We've got the limiter engaged, 3 dBs worth of gain using the limiter, and we've got the ceiling there. In fact, I'll keep that open. I'll pin that so we can look at the reduction here on the limiter. So let's take another listen to the song. Okay, I'm going to push this up another dB. And once again, we're looking here, the true peak is still at -1.4, -1.5 on the master here, and our integrated luffs is -15.5. I'm going to push that up another dB. We're not even registering any compression here on the limiter. I'm going to go, let's go from here, and let's just take a bit of a snapshot of the song at this stage here, because I'm looking at the waveform, we've got quite some nice peaks here, so let's take a listen here. Okay, I'm quite happy with it, quite comfortable with it there. Once again, the integrated LUFS isn't going to be entirely accurate because we should really play it all the way through. We got the true peak, it's actually minus 0.9, but I'm quite comfortable with where that is at the moment. And you've got the momentary LUFS at minus 12. So I think we could probably even push this a little bit further. Now, once we're at this stage, this is where I would start to think about, okay, how are the dynamics of the track? Have we got some more room here to start pushing some further into the limiter? We've got, say, 4 dB going into this limiter. It could well be that we might use another limiter going into this limiter, so we can then start to share the load. And then that way it's not going to stress the one limiter as much, we won't get quite as much gain reduction, and we can actually get a more natural compressed sound by using 2 limiters. So that could be something that we'll do in a very short while. So I'm just a bit conscious of being waffling on here. Let's just quickly go back here. Has anyone got any questions at all? Tim, so for this track, would you recommend an overall glue type compressor ahead of the limiter, or possibly just for the drum bus? Great question. At the moment, I think let's have a look at the EQ first. The reason I'm saying this is when it comes to another compressor, I think I would like to hear what we can do with an EQ before we start doing too much with like gluing compression. Glue compression can be great, but I'm thinking because I want to get quite a lot of punch in that low end, my initial thoughts are maybe looking at some form of multi-band in the low end, something like that. And if I then add a glue compressor now, and then start adding a multi-band, I don't want to kind of get too much pumping in the low end. So it could work. Now, just thinking about it, in fact, you know what, let's try it. Let's keep this quite interactive, and we're going to try it now. And let's go for something like, I have got, let's take the limiter out there. Let's go for a bus compressor, the TR5. Okay, so it's quite a renowned bus compressor here. Just want to make sure the makeup gain is on 0. Okay, now when it comes to bus compression, there are lots of different ways that we can use it. One of the ways I like to use it in a very natural way, and the way that I find that gets a real kind of natural glue compression, is to use a relatively fast attack and a slow release, because it kind of clamps down on the transient, but it kind of allows. If you start putting a fast attack and a fast release, quite often you'll get that pumping. You don't want that. So what we want to do is get that natural compression to get that glue. So by adding like a slower release, you kind of tend to get that more natural compression. So if I go here for say a 0.3 attack, and let's go for a 0.12 release, take the threshold down, makeup's on 0, ratio 2 to 1. Let's leave it on 2 to 1. I'm kind of, certainly when it comes to bus compression, I like to use a lower ratio. In fact, let's go down to 1.5 to 1, because I do like to get a real nice smooth and gentle compression when it comes to a bus compressor. So let's take a listen and let's see what we can do with this. Okay, for me, it kind of brings that a little bit more to mid-range. There's a few things, one thing it doesn't really do too much to the low end in this particular instance at this moment. So I think before we really kind of go down to the the bus compression route, I think we really need to kind of take a look at that low end and kind of get some EQ moves in there. It does bring out more of the mid-range, but one thing I noticed as well is it brings out a lot of the high end. Now, maybe something like this will be quite good on using maybe the mid-side mode. Let's take a look at that now, because if we use it in standard stereo mode, it's going to bring out the mid-range of the guitars. If the guitars are panned quite wide, and especially if you've got things like your hi-hats and things like that wide as well, if you're going to start compress them and start to bring up the average loudness of that as well, then that can kind of take over. Whereas if we want to try and maybe think about giving that more depth, and maybe do some more of that mid-side, because you'll then have your kick, your bass and your vocal, which actually are some of the things that we've already highlighted, or highlighted that I really want to kind of bring out. Maybe it'd be better to use something like this in mid-side mode. So let's give this a go. So let's put that in mid, and we want this on your mid only. Let's take another listen and see what we can do with this. Let's get some drinks and break the ice. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to paradise. Body shaking till the morning light. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. She knows I want her and she wants me. We dance together 'cause the music's right. Turn it up, make some magic tonight. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. See, once again, for me, it's just I don't feel I'm getting quite the right balance at the moment by doing that. Maybe we could look to say go a little bit harder with maybe the ratio and do that. But I just think at the moment, let's go for an EQ, and maybe we'll go for, try and really kind of get that low end kind of pump, or not pumping, but low end that depth and that warmth that we want first and foremost. What do you think? If anyone's got any questions, then please just let me know in the comments there, and I'll keep moving. I'll keep going back and taking a look. So I want this to really be as interactive as possible. So let's just go here. I'm going to leave that there, but I'm going to bypass it. Let's go and add an effects. And as I say, I really want to kind of keep this stock as much as possible. And with Reaper, they have got this wonderful EQ. It's a JS plugin called REQ, and it does everything. It's like a Swiss Army knife. It's brilliant. Okay, so let's come out of this here. So what I want to do with this, we can do all sorts of funky things like mid-side and left-right and all sorts of things. So let's just do a simple band. We want it in let's do a low shelf, and let's just kind of have a bit of a play around with this. I don't want to do too much here, so once again we're looking at quite subtle moves, but let's just see what we can do just with a low shelf. Cowboy boots and long blonde hair. I know she sees me and I see her. Let's get some drinks and break the ice. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to paradise. Body shaking till the morning light. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. She knows I want her and she wants me. We dance together 'cause the music's right. Turn it up, make some magic tonight. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to back. Okay, let's just quickly try here. If I can put that into mid mode. Cowboy boots and long blonde hair. I know she sees me and I see her. Let's get some drinks and break the ice. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to paradise. Okay, so this is one of the things which is, if you can get one of these like utility EQs, they are fantastic. If you do a low shelf like this, once again, we're not doing too much. I mean, actually it's 3 dB. That's probably a little bit more than I'd normally do, but once again, I'm trying to kind of overemphasize a few things here, just to kind of to labour the point somewhat. But if we left this in normal stereo mode, it was bringing out a lot of the low end, but it was also bringing out a lot of low end in the guitars. And by doing that, it's actually kind of just bringing out some of that mud as well. especially when you've got that crossover between your kick and your bass, you need to kind of get a low shelf that, like here, 155 hertz. That's quite a high low shelf, to be fair. Normally you'd be thinking maybe somewhere about 80 to 100, but doing it at 155 not only brings out the warmth of the kick, but also brings out some of the bass. But if you leave that in stereo mode, it's also going to bring out some of that low end in the guitars as well, which is, it's just unwanted mud, which you then have to think about EQing. And what we can actually do here, just by putting this into mid mode, it really focuses that EQ just on your mid frequencies. So it's going to be your kick and your bass. It's not really going to affect too much of guitars. So let's just take a bit of another listen at this. I'm going to put this in. I'll bypass it, play it through, and then we'll put it into stereo. And I'll try and do a comparison between the stereo and the mid EQ. Can you get that? It's just, if you kind of almost focus in on the guitars a little bit, it sounds nice and warm when you put it in the stereo, but for me it starts to sound a little bit too muddy. It brings out some of that honking into the guitars a bit more. So take real listen to focus in on the guitars, and when I flip it between stereo and mid mode, when you put it in the mid, it still kind of brings out the warmth of the kick and the bass, but it kind of leaves some of that mud alone from the guitars. So I think that sounds much more natural using just that EQ boost in mid mode. And now just coming back to it, I want to come back to your question here, Tim, around the glue type compressor. I think a compressor might really work quite nicely now. Let's just have a quick look at the... Now if I put the bus compressor after the EQ, let's take another listen. So I think it sounds better with the bus compressor after that initial EQ. But one thing I'm just thinking of here, I'm still kind of struggling a little bit with that bass guitar. Now, the one thing I like to try is just to put in a normal peak around 200 and just want a small little dip, because it cuts away some of that low end from the guitars, and it allows some more of those low frequencies of the bass guitar to come through. Let's take a listen. spot the deliberate mistake? Who spotted it? Anyone? The Muppet on the end of this mouse over here was messing around with the second cue. Now, one of the things I was looking for here is, once again, it's just trying to bring out that bass guitar, trying to give it a little bit more, because just by cutting those frequencies of the guitar there, it kind of allows some more of the attack of the bass to come out. But one of the things I was doing is actually adding mid mode rather than side mode, which was actually cutting the frequency of the bass rather than the guitars. So once I actually realised my mistake and put it in side mode, I started to get a little bit more of that attack of the bass. So once again, it's just subtle. We don't need to do too much here. It's minus 2 dB, 233 Hz. Take a listen and say, really just focus in on that, trying to hear that, the attack of that bass. So it's actually just bringing a little bit more of that hum out and that bass guitar, and I think it's just really rounding off the low end a little bit more. I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to kind of get a vibe of a little bit honkiness for those guitars. They're very kind of, you know, starting to get a little bit honky range. And I'm thinking maybe just do something. I don't want to do too much and start to really sculpt too much away, but I am starting to get a little bit more. The more we start to sculpt it, the more it kind of brings out and kind of separates that mid-range around the 600. Let's have a quick look now and just see. I want to, once again, let's do this on the, okay, let's do this on the sides to start. Quite a wide cue. Let's take a listen. So I'm liking the balance of that much better. I just think with the, so with that kind of the honkiness, you're getting that kind of like real kind of like really honkiness like that. But you really want that crunch of that guitar to drive through. So you don't want to take too much of that away, because so the crunch really kind of drives the song. But just using that small EQ move at around the 600. So once again, I've just done it on the sides only. And it's just a small peak, 608 Hz, minus 1.58 dB. Just takes a little bit of that harshness, that honkiness away, which gives a much better balance, I feel. So, okay, let's just have a quick look. Okay. Agree on the bass. I'm wondering if that bass guitar has a top end that might benefit from being stereo imaged wider. Quite possibly. There's a few things we can do here. I'm not a great fan of stereo widening plugins, because the way that stereo wideners work are, they work more they affect the phase quite a lot, and if you can't push it too much, you kind of start losing a lot of the low end. So I'm thinking, so if we're looking at the top end that might benefit from being stereo imaged wider, there's a few things we can try. So one of the things here, maybe some form of, could we use maybe, my initial thoughts are, if we then maybe do some form of, say, mid-side EQ, do it on the sides, maybe boost that a little bit. What that's going to do is it's going to give us a little bit more stereo spread. It will spread the guitars a little bit more. I'm thinking, do we then look to maybe mono the bass a bit and kind of maybe center that a bit more, so we give a little bit more separation? That might do it. So it might kind of bring out a bit more of the, give a greater degree of separation between those guitars and that bass guitar. What do you think? That's my initial thoughts. Something that might be worth trying. I just want to take a look at this top end again, and why we're just, it's something that we kind of, I think we're getting some nice body with the bass. I think we're taking a look at the kind of honkiness. I think there's a couple of moves here that we may have to do, which is kind of maybe EQ the top end a little bit. How are we gonna do this? Okay. Right. Okay. Let's do this in a bit more of a methodical way. So I'm going to have a quick look at the. Let's have a look at the. Let's have a quick save. I want Shift and F. And let's have a look at the rear X comp. Do that now. Now this could be handy for two reasons, because we might be able to do, I don't want any other band except for the low band. I really want to focus in that low end for the time being. So I don't want to start compressing too much, but I really want to try and get a little bit more weight. I'm thinking with compression, we've given a bit of an EQ boost to the low end, which is a shelf, but there's still, I think it needs a bit more evening out. I think a little bit of compression, give it a bit more of a consistent level overall, bring up some more of those, it will take some of the transient downs, it will release some of those, or bring up some of those more lower frequencies and give more body and weight to that low end. So let's just try and have a look at the low end here. So we've got band 1, ratio 2:1, we'll leave it there, threshold 0, that's fine. Top frequency, I don't really want it 200, let's say bring that down to, try and match the EQ, around 150ish, that'll be fine. And then I want, once again, a relatively slow attack, relatively fast attack, slow release. And let's just have a listen, let's play with the threshold here. Okay, it's one of the few reasons I like using multi-band compression. It's one of those things where we've just really kind of brought that kick and that especially the bass guitar to life. Yes, it's kind of reducing the dynamic range of the low end. I kind of get that, but where it kind of raises the lower levels and kind of gives a much more even and cohesive sound, it kind of brings that warmth out the low end. Just take another listen here. So I'm really liking that. I think that's really kind of starting to give us that nice warm body and that bit more depth that we're looking for from the low end. It's really now we've now got to try to make some kind of decision as to where we go from here, because there's a few things that we can do, and I think I'm kind of loath to do too much more to the mid range. I think if you start EQing too much of the mid, I don't want to do anything to the dynamics. I think once again it's a nice dynamic element. You get that nice punch and you get that nice kind of aggressive kind of. It's almost like trying to describe the sound, but it's almost like it's almost like a real kind of growl in there from the guitars, which I really want to keep. And I don't want to do too much certainly to the dynamics of the mid range. I don't really want to do too much more with the EQ. I think if I start doing more with the EQ, you start to thin out the sound. Just doing it on the sides only kind of leaves the vocal to breathe. If you start to, if the vocal was quite nasally, then maybe I'd do that 600 Hertz EQ cut on the whole stereo rather than just the mids. But I think just leave it as it is for the time being. I think the thing is, it's now just kind of bring the top end to life. There's a few things I'm kind of conscious of here, because it's trying to add some width to the guitars. We know they're very mid-range heavy. Maybe we can look to add some width to those as well. The vocals, I want to try and give a little bit of air to the vocals. But the thing I'm a little bit cautious of is the top end's quite crispy with the hi-hats as well. So if we start to do too much boosting the top end, especially with the sides, and the hi-hats start getting a bit harsh, then we might then need to use something like a de-esser or the high band of a multi-band compressor to kind of tame that high end and take away some of that harshness. So let's take a little look at that now, and let's see what we can do with that. As I say, I'm quite liking where we are with the majority of the song. It's just really trying to just bring out those other bits to life. So I'm going to go back to let's add another REQ in. It's a JS. Okay, I'm really focusing on the top end here. So there's a few things that I'm looking at. I'm looking at maybe something mid. Do something on the mid, maybe a high. Let's try and do a high boost overall. See what it sounds like, and let's then decide at that point whether we need to kind of modify it, whether we need to do some kind of. Let's do a high shelf, some kind of just do some mid EQ only. Okay, let's take a listen. okay, I quite like that. I quite like it on the. I'm just giving that air to the vocal. I think once again, it's now trying to think. Okay, try and add a little bit of width. I kind of think I like the idea of adding some width to it, but if you start to do too much with EQ, it's then going to start to bring out those hi-hats, and then going to need to compress it. And I'm just wondering if then kind of doing that is kind of we're going to lose some of that good work that we're doing with EQ. Let's have a quick look. What's the questions here? Do I hear an organ somewhere in the background? You know what? I've never noticed one. Let's take a listen. She wants me. We dance together 'cause the music's right. Like a map. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to paradise. Body shaking till the morning light. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Baby, let's get down tonight. Is it here? Yeah. I'm not sure it's an organ. To me, it sounds a bit like, almost like, oh, what do they call them? Like a double stop note on the guitar with a bit of feedback. But I see what you mean. It kind of sounds very kind of like pad, almost kind of ethereal, kind of almost. It's that kind of like ambient kind of paddy type sound. But to me, it sounds a bit more like a say a sustained guitar notes, like a double stop type thing. Okay. Right, high end. Let's do. Let's have a look, see if I can get some inspiration here. Let's have a quick look here, stereo width. Let's have a look at this stereo enhancer. I'm not too sure this is going to be what we want, but let's just have a look with a listen. Width low, width high. Ah, that's quite interesting. And there's a crossover. So if I was to put the crossover, let's say, do it quite high. Take a listen. Let's try and move this. I'm just going to over exaggerate here, and let's kind of just try really kind of see what this can do. So let's just take a listen. actually quite like that. I didn't think I'd like this at all. Stereo enhancer. I really don't like these things. I love the fact that you can split the highs and the lows. That crossover function is gold, because you really don't get anything like that. It's very kind of, I've certainly not come across anything like that. But then once again, I'm probably not the best person to ask about stereo enhancers. But to have that crossover and to really be able to focus it in certain areas like this, if I don't want to do anything, say, you know, I don't even like anything, say, sub 2K. 2K is that kind of harsh tone anyway. So really, if we can kind of do, if we was to kind of do this more like an alternative de-esser. De-esser kind of tame, if you think about a vocal de-esser, it normally around about the 5.5 to 6K, and it normally then compresses that range above that. What we're doing is spreading the stereo width above that. I actually quite like what this is doing, and I love that flexibility. So I quite like that. I really do quite like that. Let's have a quick look. How you doing, Nick? You okay? I really like where we're getting with that, to be fair. I think it's really kind of, as I didn't want to kind of get too in depth with this first live stream. We're going to kind of keep this high level and quite basic, but I like what we're doing. We're getting some real nice low end punch, we're getting some nice evenness and kind of some more weights at the low end. I think we've focused some more of the, given some more air to the vocal, which is good. It was very mid-range focused. I think we've taken some of that honk away with the EQ, but still left a lot of that kind of growl we get. And I like that little bit of that stereo enhancer, what that's doing, and especially the fact with that crossover. The only thing I'm just not concerned, I'm a little bit concerned about now is, once again, it's just those hi-hats, just taming that top end. And I think that might be where we leave it, to be fair, just for this particular live stream. Let's have a quick look. Let's have a look. Let's go back to the rear X comps. Let's put another. I'm doing this very much in sequence because I could potentially go back and have a look here, but I want to kind of control it after the EQ and after the enhancement, which is why I'm kind of duplicating, doing a couple of moves on each plugin and moving on. There's probably more plugins than I'd like, but I'm more focused here on just what they all sound like rather than how many they've got. I'm not using every single function on all of them, but it's just this last one here. So what we got here, so we've got the top frequency 24. Okay, so threshold, that's okay, so it's 2 to 1. Once again, let's do stick with our trusty old fast attack slow release. I'm going to leave it here. What's that, around 5 point? This is about 5k. Okay, let's take a listen and let's have a bit of a play. And I just want to, all I'm looking for is just taking a little bit off those hi-hats. Right, I quite like where that is. Once again, it's not. It's not doing. I don't want to do anything too drastic because I quite like the. Once again, going back to that balance. I quite like the balance that we've got, but it's just trying to take away a little bit of that harshness, and just by using that little bit of multiband on the top, it just takes away some of that kind of that tinniness from the hi hat. It's kind of almost deadens it just somewhat, but it just gives a bit more of an overall balance and less of a harshness. So I quite like where we are with that. So before we go and take another listen, let's have a quick look here. Don't think there's any more questions. So let's just take a look, see where we are with things. Okay. So we're just going to do a quick bypass of all the effects on and off. Let's close that a minute. I know she sees me and I see her. Let's get some drinks and break the ice. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. Take each other to paradise. Body shaking till the morning light. Hey baby, let's get down tonight. She knows I want her and she wants me. We dance together 'cause the music's right. So I quite like where we're going with that. I really quite like that. I think we kind of achieved what we set out to achieve. Just going back through some of the measurements here. We have integrated last measure minus 13.2. I'm quite happy with the overall dynamics. I think we could probably eke a little bit out of the limiter, if I'm perfectly honest. Got the momentary max at minus 11.1. Let's just take a listen to the limiter. Interesting. It's about a dB at max its gain reduction. Look at this here. Reduction, it said 7 point something without even moving. I don't know what that reduction is there, because 1 minute it was saying 6, 1 minute it was saying 7, 1 minute it was saying 5, yet this wasn't actually moving at all. But the rest of the song, I'm quite happy. I mean, I just think that's one of those little quirks there. Because the rest of the song, it was less than a dB's worth of gain reduction on the limiter. And we've got that to, so minus 12.6 at the end, so it's going to be there or thereabouts as to where we once again, I think we probably push it a little bit more. I think with the original, I probably pushed it to around about minus 10, minus 11. But once again, as much as I say I don't like target figures, I don't want to push it just for the sake of pushing it as well. If you like where it is, you like where it is. I quite like where we are with that. I think just for a short mastering session, just to go through some of those basic techniques and basic thought processes, I quite like the end result. So let me know what you think. I'm just going to quickly open this up here. Do you guys have any questions at all? Okay, so there's no questions coming through here. So I think we're going to kind of just leave it there, really. I say it's really just trying to highlight some of the different thought processes. A lot of it is kind of, I've always kind of likened it to point and counterpoint. So quite often you'll find that you'll do something and it kind of you'll have to do an alternate move to kind of do an adjustment, and that's really where I think a lot of the where you can really kind of get to with your mastering. Let's just move this onto full screen mode here. So yeah, a lot of it is kind of, let's say, it's point and counterpoint. I've always kind of make sure that I go into everything with a clear plan. So I always make notes of what I'm listening to. And once again, it's not just dynamics. I'm looking for balance and trying to get that balance. Where does the overall volume of the track sit? With this, it was quite clear that I wanted to kind of do something to the low end, get some more weight and punch, and we really kind of did that. And I like the fact that we kind of did that in the way we kind of done it. Let me just quickly go back here. If I then go back to your screen capture with a mugshot on there, so we see that here. And I like the fact we've done this in a. So we started off with the re-EQ and just a couple of moves here. We did small shelf, which was on the mids only. It was a small cut, and it was on the sides. Peak cut size 233 Hz, and that was just kind of allowed the bass guitar some more room to breathe. And then we took some of the honkiness out of the guitars. So once again, a little bit of a side EQ, 608 Hz at minus 1.58 dB, just to take out some of that honkiness. And then we have the bus compressor in there. Once again, we only did this to the mids to kind of really kind of bring out those low frequencies. 2:1 ratio, quite a fast attack, slow release. Didn't do anything with this sidechain high pass. I would say just a small amount, a couple of dBs with the makeup there to taste. And then we kind of rounded that all off with the multi-band compressor, and it's just doing the low end. Up to 150 Hz, and we got, I say, 2:1 ratio. Once again, a nice, natural, relatively fast attack, slow release. Nothing too crazy here. And we're just getting a little bit more kind of body and weight with the multiband compressor. And then we looked with the REQ again. And this was just, once again, it was another shelf, but a high shelf this time. We've done it in the mids only. And we did that to bring out the air of the vocals. I didn't want to, at that time, I didn't really want to kind of go too mad with the hi-hats and a lot of the side frequencies, although we did use the stereo enhancer. And for me, this plugin, I really like this. Going to have to look into this a bit further. And we just had a little bit of stereo width, literally say just 134%, 5K and above. So we was able to use the crossover there, so we didn't do anything below 5.2K. And then we just finished it off here with the rear X comp, just for those high frequencies, just to tame those hi-hats. So where we used the stereo enhancement to give that additional width, it did bring out a little bit of harshness on the hi-hats. We just used the rear X comp just to tame that top end a little bit. So you know, nice simple moves. Yeah, there's probably a few more plugins than I'd normally use, but I quite like the way it's all been done methodically. And I think we've got some really nice sounding results. Stealth limiter, once again, we've only put 4 dBs into it. Reduction less than a dB. We've got the ceiling here. And let's just take one more listen to it, and we'll go through and we'll bypass the effects. Technically, we should probably volume match this because there is going to be some volume differences. Maybe that will be one for the next live stream that will do that, because there will be people that say, well, it's going to be additional volume. It's probably going to be a little bit of that, but let's take another listen anyway. Cool. So there we have it. So that's just a nice simple master for the first live stream. So let's just go back. I just want to go back and just see if there's any further questions. So I'll go back to full screen mode here, and I've got YouTube open. Okay. No more questions coming through at the moment. So, okay, well, it's just coming up 9 o'clock. I think that's kind of a good place to wrap. So, thank you to everyone for joining the first live stream. I found this really, I found it really enjoyable. Actually, I like it. I like doing the interactive bit. I like getting the feedback from you guys. And I think this is the thing: is the beauty of mastering is a lot of it is subjective, and you know, being able to do this you know, together and really kind of get some ideas of each other. I think that's really what I wanted to kind of achieve with this channel. Really share some thoughts and ideas between us. So thank you for joining. Thank you for your contributing with some of your ideas, and I hope this has given you some, you know, some good tips to take away. And I hope it's given a brief overview of some of the mindset. I will be looking to do more of these, probably, yeah, even if it's just once a month, something like that, so we can get to, you know, just do these live streams and do a live you know, an in-depth mastering session as such, or you know, or if there's a particular technique that you want to go more in depth on, let me know. I'm also still looking out for songs to master for the channel as well. So if you've got a song that you want me to master, get in touch, smudge@masteringitb.com, and we can look to maybe feature that in a future video